Good day, everybody. Welcome, my friends. I appreciate you being here. Hey, before I get started, let me explain the little lighting difference here. My good friend Stephen Schnee, you all know him as Spaz, and he does a great series of videos. Please, if you haven't heard of Steve yet, go check out the Stephen Schnee channel. That's S-C-H-N-E-E, Stephen with a P-H. Stephen Schnee. He does a great job on his videos. He has a couple of different series, but is it power pop? He talks about 80s stuff, pop music, all kinds of cool stuff. Well, one of his most recent series is about being in the think tank with Spaz, where he chooses different topics and he expounds on them a little bit, and it's very interesting, and I highly suggest you check it out. However, in this series that he does, he has this little lighting effect, which is this. And I was so impressed with it, and I said to him, Steve, where did you get that lighting effect you've been using in this series? And he told me just go to Amazon and how to get it, and for like only 20 bucks, I picked one up. So I don't know if I'll be using it in all my videos, folks, but I thought I would use it in this one, and you can let me know if you like it or not. I think it's a different kind of effect. It's kind of a relaxing, kind of wavy, watery effect, I think it's called, and I'll probably use it once in a while when I'm listening to music and stuff, just to have a little relaxing background going on. Anyway, let's get back to the video. So I'm going to do something a little different today, not Beatles. This is about milestones, about anniversaries. Now, we all know 50 years ago was 1969, and that was a huge year for anniversaries. Whenever something hits that 50-year mark, it's a big deal, especially like when people have been married 50 years and they're celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary, which is called the gold anniversary or the golden anniversary. It's a huge deal. Now, we've been going crazy this year with all kinds of big milestones, with the the first landing and walk of men on the moon back in 1969 with Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong and Michael Collins, and then 50 years ago was Woodstock. And then most recently for us Beatle fans was celebrating the big 50th anniversary of Abbey Road. And that release and all the hoopla surrounding that. It's a big deal when you hit that 50-year mark. But I was thinking when all this was happening this year of 2019, I said, hey, what about 1979? Which is celebrating 40 years ago. 40th anniversary of 1979. And I don't know about you, maybe some of you sitting there scratching your head going, Matt, who cares about 1979? That wasn't a big deal. Well, maybe I'm being a little bit, one-sided here, looking into myself and my own personal life. But for me, 1979 was a big year as I started thinking about it. I know it's not as significant as some other anniversaries, but I said, gee, this is a big deal for me. That's the year I became friendly with my wife. I had met her in late 1978, but in 1979 is when I really became friends with my wife. So that was a big deal to me, thinking about Mrs. Street and how we've been together all these years, and how much I love her and things we've been through and whatnot. It was also the year I graduated high school, class of 79, so that was pretty significant for me. And it was also a big transition for me as kind of going from a child to an adult, in the sense that, I was finishing up high school in the first part of 1979, and then when I graduated, with only a month later, or a little over a month later, I went into the U.S. military and went on a 6-year odyssey of, 4 years active duty and 2 years reserves, and it really had a big impact on my life and the direction my life eventually took and what happened to my life. And I know for a fact that if I hadn't gone in the military after high school, my life would probably be totally different today, and I may or may not be sitting here speaking to you right now. Who knows? But anyway, it's a big year for me, 1979. What about for you? Where were you in 1979? How were you doing? What were you up to? Maybe you weren't born yet. Maybe there's some other significant things that happened to you that year. So tell me about some things that happened to you during 1979, 40 years ago. Can you believe it? I can't believe it's 40 years since a lot of these things happened to me. So what I thought I'd do in this video really quick is I'm going to go through fast, maybe a comment or two on each one, a series of albums that really meant a lot to me that came out in 1979, and the majority of them I bought that year and was into them, and I thought I'd show them to you now. Now, a few of them I have only on CD because I either had them on cassette and those are gone, or I might have had the vinyl and that's gone, but the majority will be vinyl. So I'm just going to go through them really quick with a comment or two. This was a big one for me. Joe Jackson's Look Sharp. A lot of hits on it. This was a big album from 1979, and I really love this album. Well, he has a couple of his biggest hits on it. All right. Another one big from 1979 is this one, ACDC, Highway to Hell. And I'm pretty sure I have this on vinyl somewhere. I just couldn't find it. But this is a big album for me. And my roommate in the military, once I got into the service, he was a big ACDC fan, and he really got me into them a lot more than I ever had been. But this was one of the first ones I ever bought by them right after I graduated high school. This was a big one in 1979, Van Halen 2. Again, I had the vinyl somewhere. I don't know where it is. I know I had the cassette. This was a big album. I love their first album, and I love their subsequent albums, but this one has a lot of meaning for me. I remember working at a fast food restaurant, and at the end of the closing, when we'd be cleaning up the place, I'd put the cassette on of this album. We'd be cranking it and singing along to it and playing air guitar. Great memories with Van Halen 2. This was a big one for me. Now, the one that came out a year after this one, here's REO Speedwagon's 9 Lives. This was probably, and probably still will be, my favorite REO Speedwagon because it came out the year I graduated high school, like that summer. And I know next year the big one came out for them, High Infidelity, and that one sold like 10 million plus copies. But this one, 9 Lives, means a lot to me. It was a very significant album in my life. I love all the songs on it. And for me, this will always be my favorite REO Speedwagon album. 1979. This came out late in the year of 79, but it still has a lot of significance for me. London Calling by The Clash. If you've never checked this out, I suggest checking it out. It's probably not their best album. There's other albums by them I enjoy more, but I do love London Calling, and it came out in 1979, so it's here on my little show and tell today. All right, now to some vinyl albums. All right, let me fix my little stack here. Okay, you may remember, or may not remember this one. Remember the Searchers, who were big during the 60s, British Invasion? Well, they kind of disappeared for a while, but in 1979, they came out with this album, simply titled The Searchers. And man, I gotta tell you folks, this is a fabulous, fabulous album. If you can pick this up, pick it up. This is rock and roll and power pop at its best. The Searchers album from 1979. Those of you out there who have it, back me up on this. This is a great album. This was big when I was in the service in late 1979 in the dorm rooms. Everybody had Pat Travers, Go For What You Know. It has that big song on it, Boom Boom, Out Go the Lights. And what a rocker this album is. Those of you that had it or have heard it can probably attest to that with me. This was big again in the later part of the year of 1979. UFO's live album, Strangers in the Night. This was huge. Everybody loved this album, especially when I was in the service playing this in the dorms on our off-duty time. Man, this was a rocker. Everybody loved it. Going back to my power pop roots here, The Beats' first album came out in 1979. Paul Collins and The Beat. And I gotta tell you, this is a great one, folks. Great album. Pick it up if you can. Okay, this is a later pressing of this. I got this not too long ago. It's ELO's Discovery. Came out in 1979. It has Shine a Little Love on it. Don't Bring Me Down. All those good songs. A lot of people criticize this album, saying that it's kind of like they had some disco songs on it. And they had a couple of disco-styled songs on this album. But it's not a disco album, folks. This is a great ELO album. There's some wonderful tracks on here. If you've never heard it, I suggest check out ELO's Discovery from 1979, 40 years ago. I can't believe it. I'm still like stunned that I'm looking at some of these albums and they're 40 years old. Another big power pop favorite of mine from 1979 is 2020's first album, simply called 2020. Folks, one of the best power pop and rock and roll albums of all time. Check it out. This is a big one from 1979, and this was a gift to me from Fit to Be Tie-Dyed. Paul, thank you again, Paul. I love this album. I had never gotten into it back in 79, but Paul kind of got me into listening to a little more April Wine, and I've been doing so, and this is a great album. This is a rocker. This is called Harder, Faster. from April Wine, 1979. Another one of my favorites from 1979 is the first B-52s album. Man, check this one out. It's quirky, it's fun, and don't forget this is one of the albums of several that John Lennon was getting into during the spring and summer of 1979 and going into 1980 when he was getting ready to record Double Fantasy with Yoko. He was heavily into this album and how this band had been influenced in some way by Yoko Ono and her vocals and her music, and that impressed John a lot. And so he really was into this band. And this was probably the main album John listened to. Great album, 1979 B-52s. Here's another kind of obscure one, but one of my favorites from 1979, the Pez Band, Cover to Cover. Another great power pop band from back in the day. They've recently come out with a great new remix of this album on CD. I suggest you check it out. It's called Pez Band, Cover to Cover, the remix. And I'll tell you, the remix is fabulous. Who remembers this big one from 1979? Do you remember when the Kids Are All Right film came out? And this was the soundtrack to it. And man, this album was just stellar. It's just fabulous, folks. Those of you that have had it or heard it, you know what I'm talking about. The Who, The Kids Are All Right, 40 years ago. Great album. Okay, one of my favorites from 1979 is the Pretenders' first album. 40 years ago, I can't believe it. My goodness. This is a great album, has a lot of their big hits on it. It's a rocker. I had a big crush on Chrissie Hynde. Who didn't? You know, she's just a great singer, great songwriter, and a cute gal. So, Pretenders' first album, 1979. The Police's second album came out in 1979, Regatta de Blanc. Love this album. I got it when it first came out. I've always loved the Police. Saw them live back in the 80s. And I got to tell you, this is a great one to get, folks. 40 years old. Can you believe it? Another band I truly love, Blondie. And although this is probably not their best album, it's Eat to the Beat, by the way. It came out in late 79. Parallel Lines is probably my favorite from 1977-78 period. But this is still a good album. I enjoy it. Eat to the Beat, Blondie, 1979. All right, what else we got here? Okay. Well, let me show you these two guys together. One of my favorite bands of all time is Cheap Trick. You all know that or should know that. I love Cheap Trick. I've seen them live many times. Fabulous, fabulous band. And these two albums came out in 79. This in the first half at Budokan. If you don't have this, folks, and you're into rock and roll, what are you waiting for? This is a classic. This is a classic album. Okay, here's the back. And then later in the year, they came out with Dream Police, probably their most commercially successful album. This is fabulous. There's not a bad song on this album. Highly, highly recommended. Cheap Trick's Dream Police. Can you believe it? 40 years old. Unbelievable. And still as relevant as ever. Okay, here's a big one from 1979. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Damn the Torpedoes. Man, what a great album. It's one of his best, and it still holds up today. And there's probably not a classic rock station that isn't right now playing something from this album somewhere. They're always playing his stuff from, Free Falling. What was that? Full Moon Fever. That's always being played. Well, this one too is another Tom Petty album that gets played to death on FM classic rock radio. But you know what? When you really get down to it, it is a great album, and the songs hold up. Okay, 1979. Where are we going next here? Okay, this is a big one for me. The Cars, Candy O. I love the first Cars album, and I'm not sure which one I like better. I'd have to someday do a dedicated video on my favorite Cars album or ranking the Cars, because this one came out and this one knocked me out. I loved Candy O. It's a great album, fabulous, great songs, great pop and rock material, and I say it's right up there with their first album for sure, if not maybe a little better. Okay, going back to my power pop theme, the power pop album that started the craze and went crazy and sold in the millions. Get the Knack, June of 1979. This was huge, folks. Right after I graduated high school, this thing exploded. And you know what? Say what you want about the Knack. Don't have to buy all their stuff, but I do highly recommend you at least get this one. This is a great little rock and roll album, no matter how you slice it. All right, it kind of came out in early 1980, but I have a single here of What I Like About You from the Romantics that came out in late 79. So I'm going to kind of consider this one of the last releases from 1979. But the Romantics' first self-titled album, The Romantics, which was officially released like in the first couple of days of 1980. But like I say, the single came out late in 79. The album was recorded late in 79. So for me, it kind of puts a cap on the decade of 1979, coming into the 80s, and what would happen musically in the 80s. But folks, this is a fabulous, fabulous album. Don't go by the silly cover, them wearing their red leather stage suits. I mean, they're a cool band. They put out some great material. I have all their albums, and I highly recommend their first one, The Romantics. And my last two will be Beatles related. And the first one is this one. 1979, the George Harrison self-titled album. One of his best, one of my favorites ever of George's. You can't beat this album, folks. It's up in the top 3 or so of his albums for me. Someday I'm going to do a George ranking, I promise. And this one will be right up there. I love this album. Helped me through a lot of tough times during the latter months of my high school senior year in 1979. And this album was there for me. And I listened to it a lot. This is my original, still in the shrink wrap. And I'll always cherish this album from George. Beautiful album. Any of you that know it and love it, which I'm sure many of you do, you know what an album this is. It's so great. And last but not least, one of my favorite Paul albums, if not my favorite Paul album, Wings Back to the Egg, 1979. I have it signed here from the last Fest for Beatle fans by Steve, Denny, and Lawrence. All signed it for me, as you can see, kind of, with the glare and everything. But, man, Back to the Egg, it doesn't get the credit it deserves. A lot of people, you know, put this album on the back burner as one of Paul's lower albums. Not me, folks. I love this album, one of his best. Another album that really meant a lot to me during 1979, 40 years ago. Oh, my goodness. And I love it. Paul, thank you for this album. It's great. Well, that's it, folks. I just wanted to go through 40 years ago. Memories we have, the music we loved. I hope you enjoyed seeing a lot of these albums. Maybe you have many of these albums. Maybe you love many of these albums. Let me know your thoughts. What do you think of my little chart here? And I won't really call it a chart because this isn't a ranking. It's not all-encompassing. I know I've missed a lot of albums that you all love and that I love from 1979, but I either couldn't find them or I had them at one point and now they're not part of my collection. So anyway, folks, that's it. I hope you enjoyed my little trip, my nostalgia look to the past to 1979, 40 years ago. Thank you again. Bless you all and talk soon. Bye-bye.